The trap is set. Helena Martinez never imagined that protecting children would make her a criminal. At 34, she had dedicated her life to running the Riverside Community Center, a haven for over 200 underprivileged families. The center occupied a modest building that had served the neighborhood for 3 generations, but now it stood in the crosshairs of a massive development project. The trouble began when Blackstone Development announced plans to demolish the entire block. Helena knew this wasn't just about progress, it was about profit. The company wanted to build luxury condos that would price out every family the center served. So she did what any reasonable person would do, she researched the building's history and discovered it qualified for historical landmark status. Helena spent weeks collecting signatures from residents, documenting the center's significance to the community. Every signature was genuine, every story real. She followed every legal procedure, filed every form correctly. But apparently, doing the right thing had made her a target. 3 months later, Helena found herself in handcuffs. The charges were serious: obstruction of justice and tampering with government documents. According to the prosecution, she had fabricated the historical significance claims and forged signatures. The evidence seemed overwhelming, but Helena knew it was all lies. Her husband Miguel had been called to Washington for an emergency session just days before her arrest. As a federal appellate judge, his work often took him away at the worst possible times. He promised to return before the trial, but Helena wasn't sure he would make it in time. Now, sitting in the ornate federal courthouse, Helena felt the weight of the system pressing down on her. The mahogany panels and marble columns seemed designed to intimidate, to remind people like her that they didn't belong here. Judge William Crawford, known for his harsh sentences and political connections, looked down at her with barely concealed contempt. Helena clutched her worn leather journal, the only weapon she had against a system determined to silence her. She had documented everything, every meeting, every conversation, every suspicious coincidence. If she was going down, she would at least leave a record of the truth. The courtroom filled with spectators, most of them curious onlookers drawn by the media coverage. Helena recognized a few faces from the community center, people who had come to support her despite the risk. Their presence gave her strength. "All rise," the bailiff commanded as Judge Crawford entered. His black robes billowed around him like a storm cloud, and Helena felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a trial, it was a performance, and she was the sacrifice. The corruption exposed. Case number 247B, the state versus Helena Martinez, the clerk announced in a clinical voice that stripped away all humanity from the proceedings. Charges of obstruction of justice and tampering with government documents. Judge Crawford's steely gaze settled on Helena. "Miss Martinez, how do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Helena replied, her voice quiet but unwavering. She could feel every eye in the courtroom upon her, curious spectators, stern-faced bailiffs, and most importantly, the jury whose expressions ranged from boredom to suspicion. District Attorney Richard Vaughn rose from his seat, a man whose political ambitions were as carefully tailored as his expensive suit. "Your Honor, the state requests that bail be denied. Ms. Martinez has demonstrated a blatant disregard for the law and poses a flight risk." Helena's court-appointed attorney, Mark Simmons, fumbled with his papers. He was young, clearly overwhelmed by the high-profile nature of the case. "Your Honor, my client has deep roots in this community. She runs a children's center that serves over 200 families. She's not going anywhere." Judge Crawford's lips curled into what might have been a smile, but on his face it resembled something predatory. "Mr. Simmons, your client is accused of falsifying documents to prevent the lawful development of property worth millions. These are serious charges." The prosecution's case unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Witness after witness took the stand, each delivering testimony that painted Helena as a manipulative activist willing to break the law. Regina Parker, the city planning commissioner, was particularly damning in her testimony about the fraudulent signatures. But something felt wrong. The witnesses were too polished, their stories too perfect. Helena had seen enough community meetings to know when people were being genuine, and this wasn't it. During a brief recess, Helena sat alone at the defense table while her attorney stepped out to take a call. That's when she overheard it, a conversation between two court reporters that changed everything. "This is such a waste of time," one whispered. "Crawford already decided this case before it started." "What do you mean?" the other asked. "Haven't you heard? That development project is being financed by Crawford's brother-in-law. This trial is just for show." Helena's blood ran cold. She had suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed made her situation feel suddenly hopeless. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone beneath the table and sent a brief text to Miguel. "It's worse than we thought. Judges compromised. Need you." Judge Crawford noticed the movement immediately. "Ms. Martinez, surrender your phone immediately. This is a courtroom, not a social gathering." A bailiff approached with an extended hand. Helena reluctantly handed over her phone, praying Miguel had received her message. "Now," Crawford continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "let us proceed without further interruptions from the defendant." As the afternoon wore on, Helena watched her future slip away with each fabricated piece of evidence. Her attorney's objections were feeble and consistently overruled. By 4 p.m., she could see the jury's minds being poisoned against her. When Judge Crawford announced they would continue into an evening session to expedite matters, Helena knew he was rushing toward a predetermined conclusion. The trap was closing, and she was running out of time. The breaking point. Helena's heart pounded as the evening session began. Judge Crawford was clearly rushing toward a conviction, and her inexperienced attorney seemed powerless to stop it. The prosecution's final witness, a so-called handwriting expert, took the stand with theatrical confidence. "Dr. Patricia Novak," District Attorney Vaughn announced, "could you please share your findings regarding the defendant's alleged signature fraud?" Dr. Novak adjusted her glasses and opened a thick folder. "After extensive analysis, I can confirm that at least 37 signatures on the landmark petition show clear signs of forgery. The pressure variations and stroke patterns are inconsistent with genuine signatures." Helena felt her world crumbling. She knew every person who had signed that petition. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought her grandchildren to the center for 15 years. Tom Williams, whose son had learned to read in their after-school program. These were real people with real stories, not fraudulent signatures. "Objection, Your Honor," Mark Simmons finally spoke up. "This analysis was conducted without proper chain of custody documentation." Overruled, Judge Crawford snapped without even looking up from his papers. "Continue, Dr. Novak." Helena couldn't take it anymore. Against all courtroom protocol, she stood up. "Your Honor, I need to speak." The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Crawford's face darkened with fury. "Ms. Martinez, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt." "I'm already being held in contempt," Helena replied, her voice growing stronger. "Contempt of a system that's supposed to protect justice, not corrupt it. Every signature on that petition is real. Every story is true. These children and families deserve better than this charade." "Bailiff." Crawford barked, but Helena continued speaking. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that this trial isn't about justice at all. It's about money. It's about a judge who has a financial interest in seeing me convicted so his family can profit from destroying my community center." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. District Attorney Vaughn jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly unstable and making wild accusations." "I'm making factual accusations," Helena shot back. "Judge Crawford's brother-in-law is a primary investor in Blackstone Development. This entire trial is a sham designed to clear the way for their project." Judge Crawford's face turned purple with rage. "Ms. Martinez, you are in contempt of this court. Bailiff, remove the defendant immediately. I sentence her to." But Crawford never finished his sentence. At that moment, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open with a resonant bang that echoed through the chamber. Every head turned toward the entrance, and the air itself seemed to change. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. His presence commanded immediate attention, radiating an authority that even Judge Crawford couldn't ignore. The man's eyes swept the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to holding the highest levels of power. Helena's heart skipped a beat. It was Miguel, but not the Miguel who left for Washington days ago. This was Miguel in his full professional capacity, and the transformation was breathtaking. "Your Honor," Miguel said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority as he strode down the center aisle, "I believe there has been a severe miscarriage of justice in this courtroom." Judge Crawford's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The entire courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that everything was about to change. The revelation. The courtroom erupted in whispers and confused murmurs as Miguel approached the bench. Judge Crawford, who had been so confident moments before, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Excuse me," Crawford stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Sir, this is a closed proceeding. You cannot simply." Miguel reached into his jacket and produced a leather credential case, placing it on the bench before Crawford. The judge's face went ashen as he read the contents. "Justice Miguel Santos, United States Supreme Court," Miguel announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent courtroom. "I believe you've been conducting a trial involving my wife, Helena Martinez Santos." The silence that followed was deafening. Helena felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she realized Miguel hadn't just returned from Washington, he had returned with the full weight of the highest court in the land behind him. District Attorney Vaughn looked like he might faint. The jury sat in stunned silence, suddenly understanding they had been witnessing something far more significant than a simple fraud case. "Your Honor," Miguel continued, addressing Crawford with ice-cold formality, "I've been monitoring this case remotely, and I must say, your conduct has been troubling. Federal investigators have been examining the financial connections between this court and the Blackstone Development Project." Judge Crawford's hands trembled as he tried to speak. "Justice Santos, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply—" "Cannot what?" Miguel interrupted. "Cannot ensure that justice is served. Cannot protect my wife from a corrupt system. I think you'll find that I not only can, but I have a duty to do so." Miguel turned to address the entire courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you have witnessed today is not justice, it's a carefully orchestrated fraud designed to benefit a handful of wealthy developers at the expense of an entire community." He gestured to Helena, who stood with tears streaming down her face but her dignity intact. "My wife is guilty of one thing, caring too much about the children and families who depend on the Riverside Community Center. She followed every legal procedure, collected genuine signatures, and filed legitimate paperwork. The only crime committed here is the attempt to frame her for it." Federal agents began entering the courtroom, their presence making it clear that this wasn't just a dramatic revelation, it was the beginning of a real investigation. "Dr. Novak," Miguel addressed the handwriting expert, "you might want to reconsider your testimony. Federal handwriting analysts have already confirmed that every signature on that petition is genuine. Your analysis appears to have been influenced by external factors." Dr. Novak stood up abruptly. I need to speak with my attorney." "That would be wise," Miguel replied. "Judge Crawford, I'm recommending that this case be dismissed immediately and that you recuse yourself from any further proceedings involving Blackstone Development." Crawford's voice was barely a whisper. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted in cheers from the community members who had come to support Helena. She rushed to Miguel's side, and he wrapped her in his arms. "How did you know?" she whispered. Miguel smiled. "I got your text. And I've been investigating Crawford's financial ties for months. When I realized you were being targeted, I knew it was time to act." But the celebration was short-lived. Miguel's expression grew serious as he looked at the federal agents now surrounding Judge Crawford. Helena, he said quietly, this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead of us to clean up this mess and make sure it never happens again. Justice served. 6 months later, Helena stood in the same courthouse, but this time the circumstances were completely different. The federal investigation had uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond Judge Crawford's courtroom. Crawford himself had been arrested, disbarred, and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for judicial corruption and conspiracy. District Attorney Richard Vaughn had resigned in disgrace when investigators discovered he had been receiving payments from Blackstone Development to prosecute cases that would clear the way for their projects. Dr. Patricia Novak, the handwriting expert, had admitted to falsifying evidence in exchange for lucrative consulting contracts. Helena watched from the gallery as the real criminals faced justice. The Blackstone Development project had been permanently halted, and the company faced massive fines and lawsuits. The community center not only remained open but had received federal funding for renovations and expansion. It's surreal, Helena whispered to Miguel as they watched Crawford being led away in handcuffs. 6 months ago, I was the one facing prison. Miguel squeezed her hand. The system isn't perfect, but when it works the way it's supposed to, justice can be served. You just have to be willing to fight for it. The case had attracted national attention, sparking conversations about judicial corruption and the importance of protecting community resources. Helena had become an inadvertent spokesperson for judicial reform, using her platform to advocate for transparency and accountability in the court system. Mrs. Santos, a reporter approached as they left the courthouse. How does it feel to see justice finally served? Helena paused, considering her words carefully. It feels like a beginning, not an ending. We've exposed the corruption in this case, but there are probably others out there facing the same kind of abuse of power. If my story can help even one person stand up to corruption, then everything we went through was worth it. The Riverside Community Center had not only survived but thrived. The publicity from the case had brought in donations from across the country, allowing them to expand their programs and serve even more families. Children who might have lost their safe haven now had a place that was stronger and more secure than ever. As Helena and Miguel walked hand in hand toward their car, they passed the construction site where the luxury condos were supposed to be built. Instead, it was being converted into a community garden and playground, a symbol of what happens when people stand up to corruption and fight for what's right. You know, Miguel said, I've presided over a lot of cases in my career, but I've never been prouder of anyone than I was of you that day in court. You stood up for truth even when it seemed hopeless. Helena smiled. I had a good teacher. You showed me that justice isn't just about laws and procedures, it's about people willing to do what's right, even when it's difficult. The sun was setting over the city as they drove home, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The community center stood proudly in the distance, its windows glowing with warm light as children and families gathered for the evening programs. Helena had learned that justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. The corrupt system had tried to silence her, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. The children of Riverside would have their safe haven, families would keep their community anchor, and the powerful would be held accountable for their actions. As they pulled into their driveway, Helena felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The battle was over, justice had been served, and the community was safe. Sometimes, when you fight for what's right, you discover you're stronger than you ever imagined. The end.